The courtroom was silent, except for the occasional whispers and the faint shuffling of papers. The air was thick with tension as Officer Daniel Carter sat in the defendant's chair, his hands cuffed in front of him. His uniform was long gone, replaced by the dull orange of a prison jumpsuit. His eyes, once filled with authority and confidence, now carried the weight of betrayal and despair. At the witness stand, his former partner, Detective Ryan Mitchell, avoided eye contact. The man who had once trusted Daniel with his life was now testifying against him. The prosecution had painted a damning picture: corruption, conspiracy, and a setup so airtight that no one in the courtroom doubted his guilt. No one except the trembling little girl sitting in the front row. 8-year-old Lily Carter clutched a small, stuffed rabbit, her knuckles white from gripping it too hard. Her big blue eyes shimmered with tears as she watched her father, the only parent she had left, being treated like a criminal. Every word from the prosecutor's mouth felt like a dagger to her heart. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but all she could do was sit and watch as the world turned against her father. Daniel turned slightly, his eyes finding hers. For a moment, everything else faded. He forced a small smile, trying to reassure her, but even he wasn't sure what was coming next. The judge cleared his throat, bringing everyone's attention back to the trial. "Officer Carter," the judge said, adjusting his glasses, "the jury has reached a verdict." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He gripped the arms of his chair as the foreman of the jury stood. The entire courtroom leaned forward in anticipation. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant." Lily gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. The next words would change everything. The courtroom felt like a vacuum, pulling the very air from Daniel Carter's lungs. His pulse pounded in his ears as he waited for the words that would decide his fate. Across the room, the jury foreman, an older man with silver hair and a stern expression, cleared his throat before continuing. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Whispers erupted instantly, some in shock, others in satisfaction. The sound blurred in Daniel's mind, a dull roar that drowned out everything but the sight of his daughter, Lily. She clutched her stuffed rabbit so tightly that the seams strained. Her lips trembled, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment, his jaw tightening as he fought the crushing weight of injustice. He had seen criminals walk free, had witnessed guilty men manipulate the system. But never in his worst nightmares did he think he would be the one falsely convicted, watching his little girl suffer because of a crime he didn't commit. The judge rapped his gavel. "Order in the court." His voice was stern, but even he seemed troubled. He adjusted his glasses and peered down at Daniel. "Officer Carter, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Given the severity of this crime and the trust placed in you as a law enforcement officer, this court has no choice but to issue the maximum sentence. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Lily's cry cut through the silence like a blade. "No. Please, don't take my daddy." Her small voice shattered whatever composure Daniel had left. He turned fully now, his own eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Lily, baby, it's okay," he whispered, his voice cracking. It wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The bailiffs moved toward him, their hands ready to haul him away, but Daniel did something unexpected. He lunged forward. Not in an attempt to escape, but to beg. "Please," he said, his voice raw. "Just let me hold my daughter one last time." The courtroom froze. Even the bailiffs hesitated, glancing toward the judge for instruction. The request was simple, human. A father, condemned to a life behind bars, asking for a final embrace with the only family he had left. The judge exhaled slowly, his stern expression softening just slightly. He looked toward Lily, whose small frame shook with silent sobs. Then, after a tense pause, he nodded. "You may have one moment," the judge declared. The bailiff stepped back, allowing Lily to run forward. She threw herself into Daniel's arms, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of his prison jumpsuit as if she could hold on to him forever. "Daddy, please don't go," she whimpered, her face buried in his chest. Daniel held her close, memorizing every detail, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her little hands, the way her heartbeat pounded against his own. He had protected her since the moment she was born, sworn to always keep her safe. And now, the system he had once trusted had taken everything from him. "I love you more than anything, Lily," he murmured. "Always, no matter what." Tears streamed down his face as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. Lily pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Daddy, they made a mistake. I know they did. You didn't do this." "I know, baby," Daniel whispered. "But sometimes the truth isn't enough." Her small hands clenched into fists. "Then I'll find a way to prove it." A sad smile touched Daniel's lips. She was just like her mother, fearless, determined. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was her. But time had run out. The bailiffs gently stepped forward, their presence signaling the end of their moment.
"No."
Lily clung to him harder, her tiny fingers digging into his arms. "Please don't take him." Daniel pried her hands away with the gentlest touch. "You have to be strong for me, sweetheart." His voice wavered, but he refused to let her see his full despair. "I'll always be with you in here." He tapped her chest, right above her heart. Lily sobbed as she was pulled away by a kind-looking court officer. Daniel fought every instinct to resist as the bailiffs gripped his arms, forcing him toward the exit. With every step, his heart shattered further. Just as they reached the courtroom doors, Lily's voice rang out again. "Wait!" Daniel turned, and so did everyone else. Lily's tear-streaked face was filled with something new, determination. She took a shaky breath and pointed directly at Detective Ryan Mitchell, the man who had testified against her father. "You know the truth," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You know my daddy didn't do this." A hush fell over the room. Ryan Mitchell's expression flickered. Guilt, hesitation, something unreadable. He looked at Daniel, then at the judge, before finally locking eyes with Lily. For a moment, the weight of her words seemed to crush him. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "I can't." And with that, Daniel was led away, leaving his daughter standing in the middle of the courtroom, eyes filled with fire, silently vowing that this wasn't the end. The prison transport van rattled as it sped down the highway, its reinforced doors sealing Daniel away from the life he once knew. He sat in silence, his wrists cuffed tightly in front of him, staring at the floor. His mind replayed the courtroom scene over and over, Lily's cries, the judge's verdict, and Detective Ryan Mitchell's hesitant, guilt-ridden expression. Mitchell knew something. That much was clear. But whether he would break his silence was another question entirely. Daniel clenched his fists. He had spent his life upholding the law, protecting the innocent, and believing in justice. Now he was on the other side of the system, betrayed, framed, and sentenced to rot behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. But he wasn't giving up. As the van turned a sharp corner, Daniel lifted his head. The two officers sitting in the front were talking in hushed voices, their words drowned out by the hum of the engine. The reinforced metal barrier between them and the prisoners allowed only faint glimpses of the outside world. He could see city lights fading in the distance, replaced by the dark emptiness of the countryside. He wasn't sure where they were taking him yet. A maximum security prison, no doubt. Somewhere he'd disappear, forgotten by the world, locked away for life. But someone wouldn't forget. Lily. She was just a child. But Daniel knew his daughter better than anyone. She wasn't going to let this go. And that terrified him. Whoever framed him had the power to manipulate an entire trial. That kind of influence didn't come from ordinary criminals. It came from people with deep connections, people who weren't afraid to silence those who got in their way. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt a little girl digging too deep. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. His hands tensed against the cuffs. He needed to get out. Not for himself, but for her. Because if Lily started looking for answers, she might not like what she found. Back in the city, Lily sat on her bed, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her hands. The world outside her window was quiet, but inside, her heart pounded like a drum. She wiped at her puffy eyes, staring at the laptop screen in front of her. The words she had typed glowed in the dimly lit room. Who really killed Brandon Hayes? Brandon Hayes, the man her father was accused of murdering. A wealthy businessman with a shady reputation, gunned down in a parking garage late at night. The trial had been quick. Too quick. The evidence against her father had seemed solid: security footage, witness testimonies, even phone records placing him at the scene. But Lily knew better. She had seen the way her father reacted when they arrested him, the pure shock in his eyes. He wasn't capable of something like this. Someone set him up. She scrolled through article after article trying to find something. Anything. That didn't add up. And then, buried under weeks of news coverage, she found it. A single line in an early police report. The first responding officer on the scene was Detective Ryan Mitchell. Lily's breath hitched. The same man who had testified against her father. The same man who had looked at her with guilt in his eyes. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind racing. If Mitchell was the first on the scene, that meant he had control over the evidence before anyone else. He could have tampered with it, planted something, hidden something. And if that was true, then Detective Ryan Mitchell might be the key to proving her father's innocence. Lily swallowed hard. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but she wasn't going to stop. Not until she cleared her father's name. Not until she uncovered the truth. Even if it meant putting herself in danger. The glow from the laptop screen flickered as Lily's mind raced. She had found something big. Detective Ryan Mitchell was the first on the scene the night Brandon Hayes was murdered. If he was involved, it meant her father was being framed by someone inside the police force. Her fingers trembled as she clicked on Mitchell's name in the police records database. She didn't have full access, but there were still things she could piece together. Officer history, case assignments, and then something strange. Mitchell had been investigating Brandon Hayes before his death. Lily's stomach twisted. Why wasn't this mentioned in court? If Mitchell had a history with Hayes, shouldn't that have been considered? Her heart pounded as she leaned forward, reading the details. Mitchell had filed multiple complaints against Hayes, claiming he was involved in underground dealings, bribery, extortion, even witness intimidation. But those cases were quietly closed. No charges were ever filed. And then, 2 months later, Brandon Hayes was dead. Her father was framed. And Mitchell was the one who put him away. Lily shut the laptop and sucked in a breath. She was just a kid. What could she even do with this information? Go to the police? They were the ones who put her father behind bars in the first place. She needed to be smart. She needed to be careful. She needed to find Detective Ryan Mitchell. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in the back of the transport van, staring at the small bolts lining the floor. His mind had been running in circles for hours, trying to make sense of everything. Why was Mitchell so hesitant in court? Why did he look like he wanted to say something, but held back? There was only one reason: guilt. Mitchell knew Daniel was innocent. A low hum filled the van as they passed through a dark stretch of road. No streetlights in sight. The officers in the front were murmuring, their voices barely audible over the tires skimming the pavement. Then something changed. The van slowed down. Daniel's instincts kicked in. This wasn't a scheduled stop. He knew that much. The officers up front stiffened. Something's wrong, one of them muttered. The next second, a loud bang shook the entire vehicle. Tires screeched. The van swerved violently. Daniel braced himself as the transport slammed to a stop, the metal cage around him rattling from the impact. Shouts erupted outside. A struggle. Gunfire. Then silence. Daniel barely had time to process before the van doors were ripped open. A dark figure stood against the dim glow of headlights, their face shadowed. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Detective Ryan Mitchell. The man who put him behind bars. And now, the man who had just stopped his prison transport. Mitchell stepped forward, unlocking the restraints around Daniel's wrists. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. "We don't have much time," he muttered. Daniel's mind was spinning. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low. Mitchell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the dark road behind them. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply. "Because I made a mistake." Daniel froze. Mitchell's face hardened. "I know who really killed Hayes." Everything inside Daniel went still. Mitchell wasn't just helping him escape. He was about to reveal the truth. Daniel stared at Mitchell, his pulse hammering in his ears. The man who had put him away, the man whose testimony sealed his fate, was now helping him escape? It didn't make sense. None of this did. "Who?" Daniel's voice was low but firm. "Who really killed Brandon Hayes?" Mitchell's jaw tightened. "We can't talk here. They'll be looking for you." He motioned toward the darkened tree line beside the road. "We need to move. Now." Daniel hesitated. Could he trust him? The last time he put his faith in the system, it nearly destroyed him. But he had no choice. Together, they vanished into the shadows. As they moved through the dense woods, Mitchell spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "I knew Hayes was corrupt," he admitted. "He had people under his thumb. Judges, officers, even the DA. I tried to expose him, but he had protection at every level. Then, 2 weeks before he died, I got a warning to back off." Daniel frowned. "From who?" Mitchell's expression darkened. "The same people who framed you." Daniel's stomach clenched. "Who are they?" Mitchell exhaled. "A secret network inside the police force. They operate off the books, bribery, evidence tampering, even murder. Hayes was part of it, but he got too greedy. He started threatening to expose names unless he got more money." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "So they killed him?" Mitchell nodded. "And they needed a fall guy. You were perfect, close enough to Hayes to make it believable, but not powerful enough to fight back." He clenched his fists. "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have proof. When I realized what was happening, it was too late. I had to play along, or end up like you." A lump formed in Daniel's throat. His whole life had been destroyed by these people, and now they knew he was out. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. Mitchell turned to him, his eyes deadly serious. "We take them down." The safe house was a rundown cabin deep in the woods, miles from any major roads. Mitchell led Daniel inside, locking the door behind them. A single flickering bulb illuminated the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Mitchell pulled out a laptop and placed it on a dusty table. "I've been collecting evidence for months," he said. "Financial records, internal memos, even surveillance footage." Daniel stepped closer, his breath catching as he scanned the files. Names he recognized, officers, lawyers, even a judge, were all connected to the same underground network. "This is enough to expose them," Daniel said. Mitchell nodded. "But they know I'm onto them. We need to act fast." Just then, a phone buzzed. Mitchell glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. "They found us." Daniel's blood ran cold. "How?" "No idea, but we need to move. Now." Mitchell grabbed a duffel bag and tossed Daniel a gun. "You're going to need this." Before Daniel could respond, a vehicle roared outside. Headlights flooded through the cracks in the wooden walls. Then came the voices. "Mitchell, we know you're in there." Daniel's fingers tightened around the gun. His body tensed. Mitchell pulled up a live video feed on his laptop. The people outside weren't just officers. They were the network. Corrupt cops, dirty officials, people who had spent years pulling the strings. This wasn't an arrest. It was an execution. Mitchell turned to Daniel. "We fight or we run. Your call." Daniel's heart pounded. If they ran, they might survive. But if they stayed, if they fought, they could take these people down for good. Daniel inhaled deeply. Then, gripping the gun, he gave Mitchell a sharp nod. "We end this. Now." Mitchell smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." Outside, footsteps approached the door. Inside, 2 men prepared to rewrite history. And when the door finally burst open, all hell broke loose.